In the unfathomable depths of eternity, where time itself had yet to draw its first breath, there existed a vast and empty chasm known as Ginnungagap. This primordial void stretched beyond the limits of comprehension, a yawning abyss that separated two primal forces of creation, the searing heat of Muspelheim and the bitter cold of Niflheim. To the south of Ginnungagap lay Muspelheim, a realm of perpetual fire and blinding light. Its borders pulsed with incandescent energy, sending waves of shimmering heat outward into the void. Fountains of lava burst forth from its molten core, hurling glowing embers and ash into the nothingness. The very air trembled with the raw power of creation, each spark a potential universe waiting to ignite. To the north stretched Niflheim, a land of impenetrable darkness and biting frost. Glaciers of impossible size groaned and creaked as they inched forward, driven by an inexorable force. Mists of pure cold billowed outward, crystallizing into intricate patterns of ice that hung suspended in the emptiness. Rivers of liquid nitrogen snaked through canyons of frozen methane, their eerie blue glow providing the only light in this realm of eternal winter. Between these two primordial forces lay Ginnungagap, a buffer zone of perfect balance. Here, the oppressive heat of Muspelheim met the unyielding cold of Niflheim, creating swirling eddies of potential. Tendrils of fire and ice danced and intertwined, their opposing natures giving birth to new forms of matter and energy. In the heart of Ginnungagap, where the searing heat of Muspelheim and the biting cold of Niflheim collided, a miraculous transformation began to unfold. Droplets of primordial water, each one containing the essence of creation, fell into the void and coalesced. As the droplets gathered, they began to take shape, forming a massive humanoid figure. This was Ymir, the first giant born from the very fabric of the cosmos. His body was a marvel of creation, a living bridge between the realms of fire and ice. Ymir's skin was pale as the glaciers of Niflheim, with veins of blue ice visible beneath the surface. His hair was a cascade of icicles, tinkling softly with each movement. His eyes, when they finally opened, were pools of deep crystalline blue, reflecting the vastness of Ginnungagap itself. Ymir's awakening was a slow process, his consciousness gradually forming as the primordial energies of creation flowed through him. He had no concept of self, no understanding of his own existence. He simply was, a living embodiment of the forces that had given him life. As the giant's awareness grew, so did his body. He began to absorb the energies around him, drawing in both the heat of Muspelheim and the cold of Niflheim. From Ymir's body, new life began to spring forth. The sweat from his armpits gave birth to the race of frost giants, beings of ice and snow that would one day populate the frozen wastes. From his feet, which had melted in the warmth of Muspelheim, sprang the first of the fire giants, creatures of flame and ash. As Ymir continued to grow and change, his body became a microcosm of the universe itself. Mountains formed on his skin, great oceans pooled in the hollows of his form, and forests sprouted from his hair. The giant had become a world unto himself, teeming with life and possibility. Yet for all his power and majesty, Ymir remained unconscious of his own significance. He drifted through Ginnungagap, a colossal being of primal energy, unaware that he was the seed from which all future creation would spring. As Ymir slumbered in the vastness of Ginnungagap, another miraculous creation was taking shape. From the melting ice of Niflheim emerged a figure unlike any before. This was Buri, a being of immense power and potential, sculpted by the cosmic cow Audhumla as she licked the salty ice blocks. Buri was a marvel to behold. His form was perfect, chiseled from the primordial ice yet pulsing with an inner fire that spoke of divine purpose. His eyes held the wisdom of ages yet unborn, and his very presence seemed to impose order on the chaotic energies of Ginnungagap. As Buri came into his full power, he begat a son named Bor. And it was from Bor and his wife Bestla, herself born of the giant race, that the first true gods emerged: Odin, Vili, and Ve. The birth of these three brothers was a cosmic event that shook the foundations of Ginnungagap. As they drew their first breaths, new colors bloomed in the void, and the very fabric of reality seemed to shudder with anticipation. Odin, the firstborn, emerged with eyes that gleamed with insatiable curiosity and unfathomable depth. Even as a newborn god, there was an air of majesty about him, a sense that great wisdom and power lay dormant within. Vili, the second brother, came into being with arms strong enough to shape mountains and hands deft enough to weave the threads of fate. His laughter rang through Ginnungagap like peals of thunder. Ve, the youngest, was born with a voice that could command the very elements. When he spoke, even the primal forces of fire and ice seemed to pause and listen. As the three brothers grew, their unique characteristics became more pronounced. Odin's thirst for knowledge drove him to explore every corner of Ginnungagap, seeking to understand the mysteries of existence. Vili's strength and skill manifested in his ability to shape the raw materials of creation into new forms. Ve's voice grew more powerful, able to call forth light from darkness and life from the void. Together, the three gods began to exert their influence on the primordial realm. Where before there had been only the endless struggle between fire and ice, now there was purpose and direction. The brothers worked in harmony, each complementing the other's abilities as they set about the monumental task of shaping the universe. Odin's wisdom guided their efforts, allowing them to see the potential in the swirling chaos around them. Vili's strength gave them the power to mold the very substance of creation. Ve's voice brought their visions to life, calling forth new realities with each divine utterance. As their power grew, so did their awareness of Ymir, the slumbering giant whose body had become a world unto itself. In quiet moments, when the brothers rested from their labors, they would gather and speak of their hopes and dreams for the future. Odin envisioned a realm of order and knowledge, where wisdom would be prized above all. Vili dreamed of a world of beauty and strength, where great deeds would be celebrated in song and story. Ve imagined a universe filled with the music of creation, where every being would have a voice and a purpose. In the swirling chaos of Ginnungagap, Odin, Vili, and Ve stood united, their divine forms radiating power and purpose. They had come to a grim decision. Ymir, the primordial giant, must be sacrificed to bring order to the cosmos. As one, the brothers moved towards Ymir. The giant stirred, sensing their approach. His eyes, vast as glaciers, opened slowly. Confusion flickered across his features as he beheld the three gods, so small compared to his massive form, yet blazing with divine purpose. Odin spoke first, his words echoing through the void.
Ymir, first of all beings, your time has come. From your sacrifice, a new world shall be born.
Ymir's roar of defiance shook the very foundations of Ginnungagap. Ice crystals formed and shattered in the air as he lashed out with arms the size of mountain ranges. But the brothers were ready. Vili dodged the giant's fist, his godly agility allowing him to weave between Ymir's fingers. With a mighty leap, he landed on Ymir's arm, his own hands glowing with divine energy as he began to tear into the giant's flesh. Ve's voice rang out, words of power that caused Ymir's movements to slow. The very fabric of reality seemed to warp around the giant, binding him with unseen forces. Odin, wielding a spear forged from a shard of Muspelheim's eternal flame, struck at Ymir's heart. The giant's blood, an ocean of primordial ooze, began to flow. The battle was titanic, beyond the scale of any conflict before or since. Ymir fought with the desperation of a being facing extinction, but the brothers' divine power proved too much. Slowly, inexorably, Ymir's struggles weakened. With a final, earth-shattering cry, Ymir fell. His massive body collapsed into the void, the light fading from his ancient eyes. The brothers stood over their fallen foe, panting from exertion, the weight of their actions heavy upon them. But there was no time for remorse. The work of creation had only just begun. Moving with divine purpose, the brothers began the task of shaping the world from Ymir's remains. Odin directed their efforts, his cosmic vision guiding their hands. From Ymir's flesh, they formed the earth itself, molding continents and shaping vast plains. His bones became the mountains, their peaks reaching towards the heavens. The giant's blood flowed into mighty oceans, seas, and rivers, bringing life-giving water to the new world. Vili's strength was put to the test as he raised Ymir's skull to form the dome of the sky. He set it in place with 4 pillars, one at each corner of the world. Ymir's brains were scattered to form the clouds, ever-changing and drifting across the new heavens. Ve spoke words of power, calling forth light and warmth. From the sparks of Muspelheim trapped in Ymir's body, he created the sun, moon, and stars, setting them in their courses across the sky. The brothers worked tirelessly, shaping and reshaping their creation. They took Ymir's eyebrows and formed a great wall around Midgard, the realm of humans yet to come, protecting it from the chaotic forces that still raged at the edges of creation. As their work neared completion, the brothers stood back to admire their handiwork. Where once there had been only the void of Ginnungagap, now a vibrant, living world pulsed with potential. The world lay pristine and new, a canvas awaiting its final brushstrokes. Odin, Vili, and Ve stood before two trees on the shores of a tranquil sea, an ash and an elm, their branches reaching towards the sky as if in supplication. The air hummed with potential, the very essence of creation swirling around the divine brothers. Odin's eyes, deep and knowing, studied the trees intently. He saw not just wood and leaf, but the potential for something greater.
From these,
He declared, his voice resonating with power.
we shall create beings in our own image. They will walk this world we've crafted, think, feel, and grow.
Vili stepped forward, his strong hands grasping the trunk of the ash tree. With divine strength, he tore it from the earth, roots and all. The tree shuddered, as if awakening from a long slumber. Ve approached the elm, his voice a soft melody that caused the tree to bend willingly, offering itself to the god's grasp. The brothers laid the trees side by side on the soft earth. Odin knelt beside them, his hands hovering over the rough bark.
Watch, brothers,
He said.
for now we perform our greatest work.
With exquisite care, Odin began to shape the ash tree. His fingers moved with impossible precision, molding the wood as if it were clay. Slowly, a form began to emerge, a man, strong and tall. Vili joined him, his strength allowing him to shape the harder parts of the wood, forming bones and sinews from the tree's core. Ve stood over them, his voice a constant stream of power. As he spoke, color began to bloom in the wooden form. The pale bark darkened to flesh tones, and a flush of life appeared in the cheeks of the emerging figure. As they worked on the ash, the elm began to stir of its own accord, responding to the divine energy filling the air. Its branches twisted and reformed, taking on a graceful feminine shape. The brothers turned their attention to this second figure, their hands and voices working in perfect harmony to bring forth a woman from the living wood. Hours passed, or perhaps it was days. Time held little meaning in this moment of creation. Finally, Odin sat back, a look of satisfaction on his face. Before them lay two figures, perfect in form but still lifeless.
Now,
Odin said softly.
we give them the spark of life.
He leaned forward, his breath caressing the face of the man. As it did, color flooded the figure's cheeks, and his chest began to rise and fall with steady breaths. Vili approached, placing his hand on the man's brow.
I give you the gift of will,
He intoned.
the strength to move, to act, to shape your own destiny.
Ve knelt beside the woman, his melodious voice washing over her still form.
I give you thought and feeling,
He sang.
the power to reason, to love, to bring beauty into the world.
As one, the brothers spoke a final word of power. The air shimmered, and suddenly, two pairs of eyes fluttered open. Odin smiled, a rare expression of joy on his usually stern face.
Welcome.
He said, his voice gentle.
You are Ask and Embla, the first of humankind. This world is your home, a gift from us to you.
Ask and Embla stood on shaky legs, supporting each other as they took their first steps. Their eyes were filled with questions, their minds already working to understand the world around them. Vili approached, placing a hand on each of their shoulders.
You have the strength to survive, to build, to create.
He told them.
Use it wisely.
Ve's voice wrapped around them like a warm embrace.
You have the power to speak, to sing, to fill this world with your stories. Let your voices ring out across the land.
As Ask and Embla explored their new world, the three gods watched with pride and a touch of apprehension. They had created beings with free will, capable of great good or terrible evil. The future was now uncertain, filled with endless possibilities. Odin turned to his brothers, his expression thoughtful.
Our work here is done, but our task as guardians has only just begun. We must watch over them, guide them when we can, but allow them to forge their own path.
With the world of Midgardur shaped and humanity given life, Odin, Vili, and Ve turned their divine gaze upward. The vast expanse above the mortal realm beckoned, a canvas ripe for their next great work. It was time to create a home befitting the gods themselves, a realm that would come to be known as Asgard. Odin, his wisdom eyes gleaming with vision, spoke first.
Brothers, we have given form to the mortal world below. Now, let us forge a realm above, a shining citadel from which we may watch over our creation.
With purpose burning in their hearts, the three gods set to work. They gathered the most resplendent materials from the far corners of existence, gold from the heart of dying stars, silver from the mists of Niflheim, and crystals forged in the fires of Muspelheim. Vili's strength raised mighty walls of shimmering gold, each stone placed with perfect care. Towers rose at his command, piercing the very fabric of the cosmos. His hands crafted great feast halls, training grounds for future warriors, and secluded groves of otherworldly beauty. His voice sang life into their creation. His words caused fountains to spring forth, their waters imbued with the essence of wisdom. Gardens bloomed at the sound of his melody, filled with fruits of immortality and flowers of every hue imaginable. At the heart of Asgard, they raised the greatest wonder of all Valhalla, the Hall of Fallen Heroes. Its roof was thatched with golden shields, its rafters were spears, and its walls were lined with gleaming breastplates. Here, Odin decreed, the bravest of mortal warriors would feast for eternity, preparing for the final battle at the end of days. As Asgard took shape, other gods and goddesses were drawn to its splendor. Thor, the mighty god of thunder, arrived with his hammer Mjolnir crackling with lightning. Frigga, Odin's wife and the goddess of wisdom, brought with her the arts of prophecy and domestic crafts. Frey and Freya, the twin deities of fertility and love, added their own touches of vitality to the realm. Each new arrival added to Asgard's glory. Bragi, god of poetry, filled the halls with verse and song. Heimdall, the all-seeing guardian, took his place at the Bifrost Bridge, the rainbow pathway connecting Asgard to the worlds below. As the final touches were put in place, Odin called all the gods together in the Great Hall of Gladsheim. There, seated upon his high seat of Hlidskjalf, from which he could see all the realms, he spoke.
Behold, Asgard, our eternal home. From here we shall guide the fate of the 9 worlds. Let this realm stand as a testament to our power and wisdom, a bastion against the forces of chaos that ever threaten the order we have wrought.
The gods raised a great cheer, their voices shaking the very foundations of their new home. Vili and Bay stood proudly beside their brother, marveling at what they had accomplished together. As Asgard flourished and Midgardr grew, a tension began to simmer between 2 divine factions, the Aesir, led by Odin, and the Vanir, gods of nature and fertility. What began as whispers of discontent soon erupted into the first great war of the gods, a conflict that would shake the foundations of the 9 worlds. The war's spark came from an unexpected source. Gulveig, a Vanir, sorceress of great power and beauty, arrived in Asgard. Her magic, focused on desire and greed, began to corrupt some of the Aesir. Odin, seeing the chaos she sowed, ordered her burned 3 times. Each time, she emerged unscathed, her power growing. Enraged by this treatment of their kin, the Vanir demanded compensation. Negotiations faltered, and soon battle lines were drawn. Odin hurled his spear over the Vanir host, officially declaring war. The skies darkened as Thor's thunder clashed with Freyr's lightning. The earth shook as Tyr, god of war, met Njord, lord of the seas, in combat. Frigga's protective magic battled against Freyja's powerful cedar sorcery. The war raged across realms. In Asgard, the Golden Halls echoed with the clash of divine weapons. Vanaheim's lush forests became battlegrounds, its sacred groves scarred by godly conflict. Even Midgardr felt the effects, as storms of unprecedented fury lashed the lands and seas roiled in turmoil. Years passed, and neither side gained a clear advantage. The Aesir's warrior might was matched by the Vanir, nature magic. For every victory the Aesir claimed, the Vanir would retaliate with equal force. The 9 worlds groaned under the weight of divine conflict. As the war dragged on, both sides began to realize the futility of their struggle. Odin, gazing from Hlidskjalf, saw the devastation wrought upon the realms. In Vanaheim, Njord watched as the once verdant land withered under the constant battling. Finally, exhausted and recognizing the need for balance, the 2 sides agreed to parley. In a neutral location, at the borders of Asgard and Vanaheim, Odin and Njord met to broker peace. The negotiations were tense, with both sides reluctant to cede ground. But wisdom prevailed, and a truce was struck. To seal the peace and ensure future cooperation, the gods agreed to an exchange of hostages. From the Vanir, Njord and his children, Freyr and Freya, would go to live among the Aesir. In exchange, Hoenir, Odin's brother and god of silence, and Mimir, the wisest of the Aesir, would join the Vanir. The exchange was a solemn affair. Njord bid a tearful farewell to his home, while Freyr and Freyja looked to their new life in Asgard with a mix of apprehension and excitement. Hoenir and Mimir were welcomed to Vanaheim with cautious optimism. As the dust of war settled, both sides worked to integrate their new members. Freyr and Freyja quickly became beloved in Asgard, their powers of fertility and love bringing new vitality to the realm. Njord's mastery over the seas proved invaluable to the Aesir. In Vanaheim, however, things were less smooth. Ymir, without Mimir by his side, proved indecisive and unable to provide the leadership the Vanir expected. Frustrated, they beheaded Mimir and sent his head back to Odin. In a display of his own power and wisdom, Odin preserved Mimir's head with herbs and magic, allowing it to continue offering counsel. This act, while gruesome, ironically served to strengthen the peace, as both sides recognized the need for cooperation to prevent further bloodshed. As the years passed, the lines between Aesir and Vanir blurred. Their combined strengths made them more powerful than ever before. The war, terrible as it had been, had forged a stronger pantheon, better equipped to face the challenges that lay ahead. Odin, standing at the repaired walls of Asgard, gazed out at the peaceful realms. He knew that this peace had come at a great cost, but also that it was necessary for the survival of all. The Allfather's eyes, ever-seeing, turned to the future, where new threats and adventures awaited the united gods of Asgard. The Aesir and Vanir, once bitter enemies, now stood together as guardians of the Nine Worlds, their combined powers a formidable force against any who would threaten the cosmic order they had fought so hard to establish. In the halls of Asgard, a restlessness had taken hold of Odin. Despite his great power and the knowledge he had accumulated over eons, the All-Father sensed that deeper mysteries of the cosmos still eluded him. His eye, ever searching, had glimpsed the shadowy threads of fate that foretold a great calamity Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. Determined to gain the wisdom needed to navigate this impending doom, Odin made a fateful decision. He would journey to Yggdrasil, the world tree that connected all realms, and there make a sacrifice greater than any before. As Odin prepared for his quest, the other gods watched with a mixture of awe and trepidation. Frigga, his wife, sensed the gravity of his intent and tried to dissuade him, but Odin's resolve was unshakable.
My love,
He told her, his voice heavy with purpose.
this must be done. For the sake of all the realms, I must gain this knowledge.
With a heavy heart, Frigga watched as Odin donned his simplest garb, forsaking the trappings of his godly status. He took with him only Gungnir, his mighty spear, its runes glowing with barely contained power. The Allfather, driven by an insatiable thirst for knowledge, journeyed to Mimisbrunner, the well of wisdom guarded by the giant Mimir. This mystical fountain held secrets of the cosmos, but its waters came at a steep price. Undeterred, Odin willingly plucked out his own eye and cast it into the well's depths. Still thirsty for knowledge, Odin's journey to Yggdrasil was perilous. He traversed the branches of the world tree, braving the gnawing of the dragon Nidhogg at its roots and the endless chatter of the squirrel Ratatoskr as it raced up and down the trunk. The winds of the void howled around him, threatening to tear him from his path. Finally, Odin reached the heart of Yggdrasil. Here, where the energies of all realms converged, he prepared for his sacrifice. The All-Father took Gungnir and, without hesitation, pierced his own side, hanging himself from one of Yggdrasil's mighty branches.
I dedicate myself to myself.
Odin intoned, his voice echoing through the cosmos. The world tree shuddered at his words, recognizing the power of the ritual that was unfolding. For 9 days and 9 nights, Odin hung there, wounded and exposed to the elements. He refused all food and drink, his body weakening as his spirit delved deeper into the mysteries of existence. The pain was excruciating, each moment an eternity of agony, but Odin did not waver. As his physical form wasted away, Odin's consciousness expanded. He saw visions of past and future, beheld the birth and death of stars, and glimpsed the very fabric of reality itself. The knowledge of runes, the ancient symbols of power, began to reveal itself to him. On the 9th night, at the very brink of death, Odin's sacrifice reached its climax. With a final Herculean effort, he reached out not with his hand, but with his very essence and grasped the runes. As he did so, a scream tore from his throat, a sound of both triumph and agony that reverberated through all the 9 worlds. In that moment, the knowledge of the runes flooded into Odin's mind. He saw their shapes, understood their meanings, and grasped the immense power they held. The mysteries of creation itself were laid bare before him. As the All-Father's ordeal came to an end, Yggdrasil itself seemed to recognize the magnitude of what had transpired. Its leaves rustled in a non-existent wind, and a surge of energy coursed through its branches, healing Odin's wounds and gently lowering him to the ground. Odin stood on shaky legs, forever changed by his experience. The loss of his eye was a constant reminder of the price of wisdom, but the knowledge he had gained was beyond value. He could now see the patterns of fate more clearly than ever before, and the power of the runes thrummed through his very being. With newfound purpose, Odin began the journey back to Asgard. He knew that the challenges ahead, including the looming specter of Ragnarok, would test him and all the gods to their limits. But armed with his hard-won wisdom, he was now better prepared to face whatever the future might hold. As Odin approached the gates of Asgard, the other gods gathered to welcome him. They gasped at his transformed appearance, the missing eye, the deep lines etched into his face, the aura of power that surrounded him. Frigga rushed forward, embracing her husband with tears in her eyes.
"Welcome home, my love,"
she whispered.
"What have you become?"
Odin's remaining eye, filled with the weight of cosmic knowledge, gazed out over his realm.
I have become what I must be.
He replied, his voice resonating with newfound authority.
For the sake of all the realms, I have paid the price of wisdom.
The halls of Asgard echoed with the booming laughter of Thor, the god of thunder. His recent victories had filled him with pride, perhaps too much so. Odin, watching from his high seat, sensed that his son needed a lesson in humility. With a knowing glance at Loki, the trickster god, Odin set in motion a journey that would challenge Thor like never before. As dawn broke over Asgard, Thor prepared for a new adventure. He hitched his goats, Tangrisnir and Tanjoster, to his chariot, the wheels crackling with lightning as they turned. Loki, ever eager for mischief, asked to join him.
"Come then, Loki."
Thor boomed, his red beard bristling with excitement.
"Let us seek glory in the lands of the giants."
The unlikely pair set off, the chariot streaking across the sky like a bolt of lightning. As they traveled, they were joined by a young peasant boy named Thialfi and his sister Roskva. Thor, in a show of generosity, allowed them to join the journey. As night fell, the group sought shelter at a farmstead. Finding it empty, Thor slaughtered his goats for a feast, instructing his companions not to break the bones. Thialfi, tempted by the rich marrow, cracked open a leg bone, an act that would have consequences later. The next morning, Thor resurrected his goats with Mjolnir, his mighty hammer. To his fury, one goat was lame. Only Loki's silver tongue prevented Thor from slaying Thialfi on the spot. Instead, the boy and his sister became Thor's servants as penance. The group continued their journey on foot, venturing into Jotunheim, the land of giants. They came upon a vast forest, dark and foreboding. As night approached, they discovered an enormous hall with a door as wide as the building itself.
"We shall rest here for the night,"
Thor declared, pushing open the massive door. Inside, they found a series of smaller chambers. Exhausted, they settled in for the night. But their rest was continually disturbed by an earthquake-like rumbling that shook the very foundations of the hall. As dawn broke, Thor ventured outside to investigate. There, to his astonishment, he found a giant of immense proportions, snoring peacefully. The hall they had slept in was merely the giant's glove, the chambers its fingers. The giant awoke and introduced himself as Skrymir. He offered to guide them to Utgard, the fortress of the giant king Utgard Loki. As they traveled, Skrymir carried their provisions in his massive bag. When they stopped to eat, Thor found the knots of the bag impossible to untie, even with his godly strength. Frustrated and hungry, Thor struck Skrymir with Mjolnir as he slept, but the giant barely stirred. Finally, they reached Utgard, a citadel so tall its highest towers were lost in the clouds. Skrymir bid them farewell, warning them to be humble in the presence of Utgard Loki. Inside the fortress, they were greeted by Utgard Loki, himself, a giant of regal bearing and cunning eyes. He laughed at their small stature and challenged them to prove their worth through contests. Loki, boasting of his eating prowess, was pitted against Logi in an eating contest. To Loki's shock, Logi not only ate all the meat but the bones in the trough as well. Thialfi, fleet of foot, raced against Hugi but was soundly defeated 3 times, his opponent little more than a blur. Finally, it was Thor's turn. He was first challenged to drain a drinking horn in one go. Despite his mightiest efforts, Thor barely lowered the liquid level. Next, he was tasked with lifting Utgard Loki's cat. To his embarrassment, Thor could only raise one paw off the ground. Lastly, he was challenged to wrestling, but against an old woman named Ellie. To Thor's dismay, not only could he not defeat her, but she brought him to his knees. Humiliated and exhausted, Thor and his companions were given lodging for the night. In the morning, Utgard Loki escorted them out of the fortress, revealing the truth behind their trials.
You have shown great strength, Thor.
Utgard Loki said with a sly smile.
The horn you drank from was connected to the sea. You have lowered its level and created tides. The cat was actually Jörmungandr. The world serpent lifting even one paw was a feat beyond imagining. And Ellie? She was old age itself, whom no one can defeat.
Thor learned that Loki had competed against wildfire, and Thjalfi against thought itself. Even Skrimir had been Utgard Loki in disguise, and Thor's hammer blows had created valleys in the landscape. As realization dawned on Thor, Utgard Loki and his fortress vanished into thin air. The god of thunder stood there, humbled but wiser. He had learned that appearances could be deceiving, and that even the mightiest could be humbled by cunning and illusion. Thor returned to Asgard a changed god. His strength was undiminished, but now it was tempered with wisdom. Odin, seeing the growth in his son, nodded in silent approval. The thunder god's journey to Utgard taught him lessons that would serve him well in the challenges to come. In the halls of Asgard, an air of unease had settled. The gods gathered in Gladsheim, their faces etched with concern as Odin recounted his latest vision. He spoke of a monstrous wolf, offspring of Loki and the giantess Angerboda, whose power would grow to threaten even the gods themselves.
This beast, Fenrir,
Odin intoned, his one eye gleaming with grim determination.
must be contained before he becomes too powerful to control.
The gods debated long into the night, their voices echoing off the golden walls. Finally, a plan was formed. They would raise Fenrir in Asgard, hoping to tame his wild nature through kindness and familiarity. At first, the plan seemed to work. The wolf cub, though already larger than any normal wolf, played and frolicked in the fields of Idavol. But as Fenrir grew, so did the god's apprehension. His size increased at an alarming rate, and his appetite became insatiable. Soon, only the god Tyr dared approach the massive beast to feed him. As Fenrir's strength became evident, the gods realized they could no longer allow him to roam freely. They decided to bind him, but knew it would require cunning to succeed. The dwarves of Svartalfheim were commissioned to forge a chain of unparalleled strength. They returned with lading, a chain of incredible durability. The gods presented it to Fenrir as a test of strength, challenging him to break free. Fenrir, his yellow eyes gleaming with pride, allowed himself to be bound. With a mighty flex of his muscles, he shattered lading as if it were made of straw. The gods feigned amazement, hiding their disappointment. A second chain, Dromi, twice as strong as lading, was forged. Again, Fenrir was challenged, and again he broke free, though with slightly more effort. The wolf's suspicions began to grow. Realizing that no ordinary bonds would hold Fenrir, Odin sent Freyr's messenger, Skirnir, to the realm of the Dark Elves. There, the master craftsmen were tasked with creating a fetter unlike any other. They returned with Gleipnir, a ribbon as thin as silk but stronger than any chain. It was forged from 6 impossible things: the sound of a cat's footsteps, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. The gods brought Gleipnir to Fenrir, who had grown even larger and more fearsome. They presented it as a final challenge, praising its strength despite its delicate appearance. Fenrir, now fully suspicious, refused to be bound unless one of the gods placed their hand in his mouth as a sign of good faith. A heavy silence fell over the assembly. To place one's hand in the wolf's maw was certain mutilation, if not death. It was Tyr who stepped forward, his face a mask of grim resolve.
I will do it,
He declared, meeting Fenrir's gaze steadily.
for the safety of all the realms.
As Tyr placed his right hand between Fenrir's massive jaws, the other gods bound the wolf with Gleipnir. At first, the ribbon seemed to offer no resistance, but as Fenrir tried to break free, he found himself truly trapped for the first time. Panic and rage filled the great wolf's eyes as he realized the deception. He thrashed and howled, his struggles shaking the very foundations of Asgard. But Gleipnir held fast, growing tighter with each attempt to break free. In his fury, Fenrir clamped down on Tyr's hand, severing it at the wrist. Tyr did not cry out, his face a stoic mask even as his blood stained the ground. The sacrifice of his hand was the price of the god's victory. With Fenrir securely bound, the gods debated what to do with him. Finally, it was decided to imprison him on a remote island called Lyngvi, in the middle of Lake Amsvartnir. They thrust a sword into his jaws, using the hilt to keep them pried open. Fenrir's agonized howls echoed across the 9 worlds, a chilling reminder of the price of prophecy and betrayal. As the gods returned to Asgard, their victory was bittersweet. Tyr's maimed arm served as a constant reminder of the lengths they had gone to secure their safety. Odin, gazing out from Hlidskjalf, knew that this was but one battle in a greater war to come. Loki, watching from the shadows, felt the stirrings of resentment. The binding of his son would not be forgotten or forgiven. Seeds of discord had been sown, and the countdown to Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, had truly begun. In the depths of his watery prison, Fenrir waited. The prophecy foretold that he would break free at the end of days, to wreak his terrible vengeance. Until then, the great wolf bided his time, his hatred for the gods growing with each passing moment, as inexorable as the coming of Ragnarok itself. In the golden halls of Asgard, the gods gathered for a council. Recent skirmishes with the giants had left them uneasy, and the need for stronger defenses had become apparent. Odin, his one eye gleaming with foresight, called for the construction of an impenetrable wall around their celestial realm. As the gods debated how to accomplish this monumental task, a stranger appeared at the gates of Asgard. He was a master builder, a giant in disguise, who offered to construct the wall in just 3 seasons, a feat that would normally take years.
I will build you a wall so strong that no giant, troll, or any force in the 9 worlds could breach it.
The stranger proclaimed, his voice echoing through the hall. The gods were intrigued, but suspicious. Odin, ever cautious, asked,
"And what payment do you seek for this remarkable feat?"
The giant's eyes glinted as he named his price, the hand of the goddess Freyja, in marriage, along with the sun and moon. The gods were outraged at such an audacious demand, but Loki, the trickster god, saw an opportunity. Pulling Odin aside, Loki whispered,
"All Father, let us agree to his terms, but with a condition. He must complete the wall in a single winter, with no help but that of his stallion, Svadilfari. When he fails, we'll have our wall and owe him nothing."
Odin, seeing the wisdom in Loki's plan, agreed. The terms were set, and the builder began his work as the first winter winds blew across Asgard. To the gods' dismay, the giant and his powerful horse made incredible progress. Massive stones were hewn and placed with astonishing speed, the wall growing taller and stronger with each passing day. As winter deepened, the gods grew increasingly anxious. Freyja, horrified at the prospect of being wed to a giant, pleaded with the gods to find a way out of the bargain. The sun and moon, personified as Sol and Mani, trembled at the thought of being torn from the sky. With just 3 days left until the onset of spring, the wall was nearly complete. Only the gate remained unfinished. The gods, furious at the imminent loss of their wager, turned on Loki.
This was your plan.
Thor growled, his hand tightening on Mjolnir's handle.
Fix it, or it will be your head that pays the price.
Loki, his mind racing, promised to sabotage the builder's efforts. That night, as the giant and Svadilfari prepared to haul the final stones, Loki transformed himself into a beautiful mare. He whinnied enticingly, catching Svadilfari's attention. The stallion, overcome with desire, broke free from his harness and chased after Loki mare into the forest. The giant, left without his mighty steed, raged and cursed, but could not complete the work alone. As dawn broke on the first day of spring, the wall stood unfinished. The giant, realizing he had lost the wager, flew into a fury. His disguise fell away, revealing his true, monstrous form. "You tricked me," he roared, his voice shaking the very foundations of Asgard. "I'll tear down this wall with my bare hands and crush you all." But before he could make good on his threat, Thor returned from a journey, alerted by the commotion. Seeing the giant threatening his fellow gods, Thor's eyes flashed with lightning. With a mighty swing of Mjolnir, he struck the giant down, sending him tumbling from Asgard into the void below. In the aftermath, the gods marveled at their new wall, incomplete yet still formidable. Odin decreed that Asgardian craftsmen would finish the work, adding their own enchantments to strengthen it further. Loki, however, was conspicuously absent from the celebrations. He returned days later, looking haggard and avoiding questions about his whereabouts. It would be months before the truth came out. His encounter with Svadilfari had resulted in the birth of Sleipnir, the eight-legged steed that would become Odin's personal mount. As the gods gathered on the newly completed walls, gazing out at the realms beyond, there was a sense of security, but also of unease. They had their defenses, but at what cost? The deception used to win their wager had sown seeds of mistrust, and the giants now had even more reason to resent the Aesir. Odin, standing atop the highest tower, his raven Hugin perched on his shoulder, looked out at the 9 worlds with his all-seeing eye. He knew that while the wall would protect them for now, greater challenges lay ahead. The cycle of betrayal and vengeance had been set in motion, and somewhere in the cosmos, the threads of fate were weaving ever closer to Ragnarok. The halls of Asgard echoed with an earth-shattering roar that sent tremors through the 9 worlds. Thor, the god of thunder, had awoken to find his mighty hammer, Mjolnir, missing. Panic gripped the heart of the usually fearless god as he tore through his chambers, overturning furniture and shaking the very foundations of his palace in his frantic search.
Loki!
Thor's voice boomed, causing the other gods to stir from their slumber.
This has your mischief written all over it.
But for once, the trickster god was innocent. Loki, summoned by Odin to help resolve the crisis, suggested seeking the wisdom of Heimdall, the all-seeing guardian of the Bifrost. Heimdall's golden eyes scanned the realms, piercing through layers of reality.
I see it,
he said, his voice grave.
Thrym, Lord of the Frost Giants, has stolen Mjolnir. He has hidden it 8 miles beneath the earth in Jotunheim.
Odin's face darkened at the news. Without Mjolnir, Asgard's greatest weapon against the giants was lost. The balance of power in the 9 worlds had shifted dangerously. Freyja, the goddess of love and beauty, was tasked with flying to Jotunheim in her falcon cloak to negotiate with Thrym. She returned with troubling news. Thrym would only return Mjolnir in exchange for Freyja's hand in marriage. The gods convened in Gladsheim, their golden hall, to devise a plan. It was Heimdall who proposed an audacious scheme.
Thor, you must go to Jotunheim, disguised as Freyja. Loki will accompany you as your handmaiden.
Thor's face reddened with anger and embarrassment.
I will not dress as a woman,
he protested, his voice shaking the rafters.
Would you rather let the Frost Giants keep Mjolnir? Think of the havoc they could wreak, the destruction they could rain down on the 9 worlds.
Grudgingly, Thor agreed. The next day, amid much grumbling and threats directed at Loki, Thor was dressed in Freyja's finest bridal gown, complete with a delicate veil to hide his beard. Loki, shape-shifted into a comely handmaiden, struggled to contain his laughter at the sight. The odd pair traveled to Jotunheim via the Bifrost, arriving at Thrym's icy fortress in a flash of rainbow light. The Frost Giant Lord was beside himself with joy, believing his bride to be had arrived. A great feast was prepared to celebrate the impending nuptials. Thor, still disguised, was seated at the high table next to Thrym. To the amazement and growing suspicion of the giants, Freyja devoured an entire ox, ate salmon, and all the delicacies meant for the women, washing it down with 3 barrels of mead. Thrym, puzzled by his bride's enormous appetite, leaned in close.
Never have I seen a maiden eat and drink so much,
he mused. Quick-thinking Loki intervened.
Oh, great Thrym.
He simpered in his feminine disguise.
Freyja was so excited to become your bride that she hasn't eaten or drunk for 8 days.
Satisfied with this explanation, Thrym called for Mjolnir to be brought forth.
Let us sanctify the union with Thor's hammer,
he declared, unaware of the irony of his words. As soon as Mjolnir was placed in Thor's lap, the god of thunder threw off his veil, his eyes blazing with lightning. He leapt to his feet, his massive hand wrapping around the hammer's handle.
For Asgard!
Thor roared as he swung Mjolnir in a devastating arc. Thrym was the first to fall, his skull crushed by the mighty weapon he had so foolishly stolen. Thor then laid waste to the entire hall, his fury unleashed upon the Frost Giants who had dared to steal his beloved hammer. Loki, having shape-shifted back to his normal form, darted between the chaos, alternating between aiding Thor and saving his own skin from the collateral damage of the god's rampage. When the dust settled, Thrym's hall was a ruin of ice and broken bodies. Thor stood triumphant, Mjolnir humming with power in his grasp. He turned to Loki, a rare smile breaking through his beard.
Perhaps your schemes aren't so bad after all, trickster.
As they prepared to return to Asgard, Thor paused, looking down at the tattered remains of Freyja's bridal gown he still wore. Loki merely grinned, his eyes twinkling with mischief.
My lips are sealed. Oh, mighty Thor.
They returned to Asgard in a flash of Bifrost light, greeted by cheering gods and a much relieved Freyja. As tales of Thor's cunning victory spread through the 9 worlds, the balance of power was restored. Yet in the shadows of Jotunheim, the seeds of resentment and revenge were sown, promising future conflicts between the realms of gods and giants. Asgard had never known such radiance as when Baldur, son of Odin and Frigga, walked its golden halls. His very presence brought joy and light to all who beheld him. But even in this realm of eternal splendor, shadows lurked, and fate wove its inexorable tapestry. Frigga, troubled by ominous dreams, extracted oaths from every object in the 9 worlds, stone and steel, fire and water, beasts and birds, to never harm her beloved son. But in her haste, she overlooked the humble mistletoe, deeming it too young and insignificant to pose a threat. As news of Baldur's invulnerability spread, the gods made a game of it. They would gather in the fields of Idaval, hurling weapons and objects at Baldur, marveling as they bounced harmlessly off him. Baldur's laughter rang out, a sound so pure it made flowers bloom and the sun shine brighter. But Loki, the trickster god, felt the stirrings of jealousy and malice in his heart. Disguising himself as an old woman, he visited Frigga and, through cunning questions, discovered the secret of the mistletoe. With this knowledge, Loki crafted a dart from the overlooked plant. He approached Hoder, Baldur's blind brother, who stood apart from the festivities, unable to participate.
Why do you not join in the game?
Loki asked, his voice dripping with false concern.
I cannot see to aim and I have no weapon.
Hoder replied sadly. Loki pressed the mistletoe dart into Hoder's hand.
Here, let me guide your arm. You too shall honor Baldur with a throw.
Unknowing, Hoder allowed Loki to aim his arm. The dart flew true, piercing Baldur's chest. For a moment, silence fell over Idaval. Then Baldur, his face a mask of surprise and pain, collapsed to the ground. The gods rushed to his side, but it was too late. Baldur, the bright and beautiful, was dead. A wail of anguish tore from Frigga's throat, a sound so heartbreaking that every living thing in the 9 worlds wept. Odin, his face etched with grief, cradled his son's lifeless body. In desperation, Frigga proposed a plan. She would journey to Helheim, the realm of the dead, to bargain with Hel for Baldur's return. Odin agreed, and Hermod, another of his sons, volunteered to make the perilous journey. For 9 days and nights, Hermod rode Sleipnir, Odin's 8-legged steed, through dark and treacherous paths. Finally, he reached the gates of Helheim, where he found Baldur seated in a place of honor beside Hel herself. Hermod pleaded with Hel to release Baldur, speaking of the grief that gripped Asgard in the 9 worlds. Hel, her face half beautiful and half decayed, listened impassively.
If Baldur is so beloved,
she said, her voice like the whisper of graves,
let it be proven. If everything in all the worlds weeps for him, I will release him to the land of the living. But if even one thing refuses to weep, he must remain here with me.
Hermod raced back to Asgard with this news. Frigga immediately sent messengers to every corner of creation, imploring all things to weep for Baldur. And weep they did, rocks and trees, birds and beasts. Even the metals in the earth shed tears for the fallen god.
Thokay will weep dry tears for Baldur's pyre,
she said.
Living or dead, the old man's son was nothing to me. Let Hel hold what she has.
With these words, Baldur's fate was sealed. Though none saw it, Thokay's form shimmered, revealing Loki's triumphant grin for just a moment before he disappeared into the shadows. When news reached Asgard, a pall of despair fell over the realm. Odin and Frigga, their grief beyond measure, prepared Baldur's body for its final journey. They laid him upon his great ship, Hringhorni, along with his wife Nanna, who had died of a broken heart. Thor hallowed the pyre with his hammer Mjolnir, and a dwarf named Lit, who had gotten underfoot, was kicked into the flames by the grief-stricken thunder god. As the ship was pushed out to sea, Odin leaned down and whispered a secret into Baldur's ear, a promise, perhaps, or a prophecy. The flames of Baldur's pyre lit up the night sky, a final blaze of glory for the brightest of the gods. As the ship burned, Odin's ravens, Hugin and Munin, circled overhead, their mournful cries echoing the sorrow of all the 9 worlds. In the wake of Baldur's death, a chill settled over Asgard. The gods, once jovial and carefree, became watchful and wary. Odin, his grief transforming into grim determination, turned his all-seeing eye to the future. He knew that Baldur's death was but the beginning, the first thread unraveling in the tapestry of their fate. As for Loki, his role in Baldur's death would soon be discovered, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead inexorably towards Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. But that is a tale for another time. The halls of Asgard, once filled with laughter and merriment, now echoed with whispers of suspicion and anger. The death of Baldur had cast a long shadow over the realm of the gods, and at the center of this darkness stood Loki, the trickster god, his role in the tragedy finally unveiled. Odin, his one eye blazing with a fury that could melt mountains, called for a thing, a sacred assembly of the gods. As the Aesir and Vanir gathered in the great hall of Gladsheim, the All-Father's voice boomed like thunder.
Loki Laufeisen, step forward and answer for your crimes.
The trickster god, for once, found no clever words to twist. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Witnesses had come forward, speaking of his questions about mistletoe, of his suspicious absence during the mourning. Even the giantess Thalke had been revealed as one of his disguises. As the gods closed in, their faces masks of grief and rage, Loki knew his time for tricks had run out. With a snarl of defiance, he shape-shifted into a salmon and leapt into the nearby river, disappearing in a flash of scales. But Odin was prepared for such treachery. He commanded Thor and Tyr to craft a net that could catch even the wiliest of prey. The 2 gods wove a mesh so fine that not even a minnow could slip through, imbuing it with powerful magic to counter Loki's shape-shifting abilities. For days, the gods scoured the rivers and streams of Asgard, casting their net again and again. Finally, in a quiet pool beneath a waterfall, they felt a mighty tug. Thor, his muscles straining, hauled in the net to reveal Loki, thrashing in his salmon form. As soon as the net touched the shore, Loki transformed back to his Aesir shape, but it was too late. Thor's mighty hand clamped around his throat, and Tyr, remembering the loss of his own hand to Loki's offspring Fenrir, bound the trickster's hands with unbreakable chains. They dragged Loki back to Asgard, where the gods had prepared a cavern deep beneath the earth for his punishment. 3 great slabs of stone were set up, and Loki was bound to them with the entrails of his own son, Narfi, whom the gods had transformed into a wolf to slay his brother Vali. These guts were then transformed into iron bands, unbreakable and unyielding. As Loki lay bound, Skadi, the giantess whose father had been slain in Asgard, stepped forward with a final torment. In her hands, she held a viper, its fangs dripping with venom. With cold satisfaction, she placed the serpent above Loki's face, positioning it so that its venom would drip eternally onto the trickster god. Loki's wife, Sigyn, loyal despite her husband's many transgressions, refused to abandon him in his torment. She stood by his side, holding a bowl to catch the falling venom. But even her devotion could not spare Loki entirely. Whenever the bowl filled and she turned to empty it, the venom would fall upon Loki's face, causing him to writhe in agony. His convulsions shook the earth, causing what mortals would come to know as earthquakes. As the gods filed out of the cavern, leaving Loki to his fate, Odin paused at the entrance. His one eye, filled with a mixture of sorrow and steely resolve, met Loki's defiant gaze.
You were my blood once,
Odin said, his voice heavy with the weight of ages.
But your actions have sundered that bond forever. Here you shall remain until Ragnarok comes and the world tree trembles.
With those words, Odin sealed the cavern, leaving Loki in darkness broken only by the gleam of venom and the soft sobs of Sigyn. In the halls of Asgard above, a somber mood prevailed. Justice had been served, but the cost had been high. Baldur was still dead, and now Loki, for all his faults a vital part of their divine family, was lost to them as well. Frigga retired to her chambers, weeping not just for her fallen son, but for the innocence that Asgard had lost. Thor gripped Mjolnir tightly, his thoughts turning to the prophecies of Ragnarok, wondering if Loki's punishment had hastened their doom rather than delayed it. And deep beneath the earth, bound in darkness and pain, Loki's mind churned with thoughts of vengeance. Each drop of venom that fell upon his face fueled his hatred, each tremor of the earth above a promise of the destruction to come. For he knew, as did Odin, that this was not the end. Ragnarok approached, and with it, Loki's chance for revenge against the gods who had condemned him. The 9 worlds continued to turn, but a shadow had fallen across them all. In his cavern, Loki waited, his laughter echoing in the darkness, a chilling promise of the chaos yet to come. The golden halls of Asgard, once resplendent with the light of immortality, now seemed to dim under an encroaching shadow. Odin, the All-Father, stood atop the highest tower of Valaskjalf, his single eye scanning the 9 worlds for the signs he knew would come. The air itself felt heavy, laden with a foreboding that even the gods could not ignore. It began with the weather. Fimbul winter, the great and terrible winter, descended upon Midgard with a ferocity that shook the very foundations of the world tree, Yggdrasil. For 3 years, snow fell without cease, bitter winds howled across barren landscapes, and the sun's warmth became but a distant memory. In Asgard, Heimdall stood ever vigilant at his post on the Bifrost, his keen senses alert for any disturbance. One fateful day, his golden eyes widened in alarm as he witnessed the first major sign of the approaching doom. Odin rushed to Heimdall's side, his raven Hugin perched on his shoulder. Together they watched as Skoll and Hati, the great wolves born of Fenrir, began their final pursuit of Sol and Mani, the sun and moon. The celestial bodies, once moving in perfect harmony, now raced across the sky in frantic flight from their pursuers. As this cosmic chase unfolded, other portents manifested across the realms. In Midgard, brothers turned against brothers, and the bonds of kinship frayed and snapped under the weight of greed and mistrust. Wars erupted with increasing frequency, each more brutal than the last. The Midgardur serpent, Jörmungandr, stirred in the depths of the world-encircling ocean, causing tsunamis that devastated coastal lands. In Asgard, the gods convened in Gladsheim, their faces grim as they shared reports from their respective domains. Freyr, lord of fertility and sunshine, spoke of crops withering in the fields, of livestock dying in their pens. Tyr, the one-handed god of war, told of honor abandoned on battlefields awash with senseless slaughter. As the council continued, a bone-chilling howl echoed across the 9 worlds, causing even the bravest of gods to shudder. Deep beneath the earth, Fenrir, the great wolf, strained against his unbreakable bonds. With each pull, the foundations of Lyngvi, the island of his imprisonment, cracked a little more. In his hidden cave, Loki felt the tremors of his son's struggles. A wicked grin spread across his scarred face as Sigyn emptied another bowl of venom.
Soon,
he whispered, his voice hoarse from centuries of screaming.
Soon the bonds will break, and we shall have our vengeance.
Back in Gladsheim, Odin raised his hand for silence. The assembled gods turned to their leader, hope and fear warring in their eyes. The All-Father's face was etched with the weight of his foresight, his voice heavy as he spoke.
My children, the time we have long dreaded approaches. Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, casts its shadow upon us. But remember, we are the Aesir and Vanir. We have shaped the fate of the 9 worlds since the beginning, and we shall meet our destiny with courage and honor.
As if in response to Odin's words, a distant cracking sound echoed through the hall. The gods rushed to the windows to see the world tree, Yggdrasil, shuddering. Its mighty branches, which held the 9 worlds in delicate balance, began to groan under some unseen strain. As night fell over Asgard, an unnatural darkness seemed to seep into every corner. The stars, usually bright in the celestial realm, flickered weakly, as if they too sensed the approaching end and sought to hide from it. In Midgard, a red rooster crowed, its call echoing across the mortal realm. In Helheim, a black rooster answered, signaling the stirring of the dead. And in Asgard, Gullinkembi, the golden rooster, let out a piercing cry that roused the heroes in Valhalla from their eternal feast. The Einherjar, the chosen warriors of Odin, began to stir, reaching for weapons long laid aside. In the great mead hall, benches scraped against the floor as heroes of old rose, ready to face their final battle. As Asgard prepared for war, Odin retreated to the Well of Urd, seeking one last draught of wisdom from the Norns. The three fateful sisters, Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld, awaited him, their ageless faces solemn.
"Speak, weavers of fate,"
Odin commanded.
"What hope remains for us?"
The Norns spoke as one, their voices intertwining like the threads of destiny. They manipulated the twilight comes, All-Father. But remember, even in the darkest night, seeds of a new dawn lie waiting. What falls shall rise again, transformed. With these cryptic words echoing in his mind, Odin returned to Asgard. As he looked out over the realm eternal, now bustling with preparations for the final conflict, he felt a strange mix of dread and anticipation. Ragnarok approached, bringing with it an end to all they had known. But beyond that end, a new beginning awaited, a world reborn from the ashes of the old. The day of reckoning dawned, blood red over the 9 worlds. In Asgard, an eerie silence had fallen, broken only by the rhythmic beating of war drums and the sharpening of ancient weapons. The air thrummed with tension, gods and Einherjar, sensing the cosmic shift that heralded the beginning of the end. Deep beneath the earth, on the island of Lyngvi, Fenrir stirred. The great wolf, bound for eons by the unbreakable fetter Gleipnir, felt the weakening of the cosmic order. His yellow eyes, burning with hatred and anticipation, fixed on his bonds. With a growl that shook the foundations of the world, Fenrir began to strain against his chains. The first sign of his impending freedom came as a tremor that rippled through Yggdrasil. In Asgard, Odin felt it immediately, his one eye widening in grim recognition.
"It begins,"
he murmured, gripping Gungnir tightly. On Lyngvi, Fenrir's struggles intensified. The magical ribbon Gleipnir, forged from impossible things, began to fray. Threads of cat's footsteps and fish's breath unraveled as the wolf's godly strength, fueled by centuries of rage, proved too much even for dwarven craftsmanship. With each pull, Fenrir grew stronger, larger. His form swelled, black fur bristling with power, until he dwarfed the island that had been his prison. The sword that had kept his maw pried open for so long shattered, freeing his terrible jaws to snap and snarl. In a final, earth-shattering moment, Gleipnir snapped. The sound echoed across all realms, a cosmic thunderclap that announced the wolf's freedom. Fenrir reared up, his howl of triumph drowning out even the roar of Gjallarhorn, Heimdall's warning horn. Free at last, Fenrir shook the earth from his fur and turned his gaze toward Asgard. But first, he had a promise to keep. With impossible speed for a creature of his size, he bounded towards the cave where his father, Loki, remained imprisoned. The earth split before Fenrir's massive paws as he tore into the mountainside, ripping away rock and soil until he reached Loki's prison. There he found his father scarred and weakened, with the faithful Sigyn still by his side. With one snap of his massive jaws, Fenrir severed Loki's bonds. Together, Loki and Fenrir emerged from the shattered remains of the cave. Around them, chaos reigned. The sky had split open, disgorging the flaming sons of Muspel led by Surtur, their swords blazing brighter than the sun. The Midgardr serpent Jörmungandr had risen from the sea, its colossal body thrashing and churning the waters into a world-drowning flood. In Asgard, the gods armed themselves for the final battle. Thor donned his iron gloves and hefted Mjolnir, lightning crackling around him. Odin mounted Sleipnir, his 8-legged steed, Gungnir gleaming in his hand. Tyr, the one-handed god of war, strapped on his armor, his face grim with the knowledge of what was to come. As the forces of chaos converged on Asgard, Fenrir's howl split the air once more. The wolf that had been prophesied to swallow the sun and moon now set his sights on an even greater prey. His jaws gaped wide, so vast they seemed to stretch from earth to sky, as he charged toward Odin himself. The All-Father, seeing his doom approach, felt a strange calm settle over him. He had known this day would come, had seen it in visions and prepared for it across the millennia. As Fenrir bore down on him, Odin raised Gungnir one last time, his voice ringing out across the battlefield.
"Sons of Asgard, daughters of Vanaheim, warriors of Midgard. The twilight is upon us, but remember, even in darkness, valor shines brightest. Fight now, not for victory, but for the dawn that will follow this longest night."
With these words still echoing, Odin spurred Sleipnir forward to meet Fenrir's charge. The wolf's massive jaws snapped shut around the All-Father, god and beast locked in their final, fatal embrace. As Odin fell, a great cry went up from both sides of the battle. The death of the All-Father marked the true beginning of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. But even as despair threatened to overwhelm the forces of order, a fierce determination took hold. If this was to be their final battle, they would ensure it was one worthy of eternal song. And so, as Fenrir roared his triumph to the burning skies, the forces of Asgard steeled themselves for the onslaught to come. The sky darkened to an ominous crimson as Jörmungandr, the world serpent, began to stir. For eons, the monstrous offspring of Loki had encircled Midgard, its colossal form stretching around the entire world with its tail firmly clenched between its jaws. But now, as the fabric of reality began to fray, the serpent sensed that its time had come. Deep beneath the churning waves of the world's oceans, Jörmungandr's scales glimmered with an otherworldly iridescence. Its eyes, each as large as a mountain, slowly opened. Ancient and patient, the serpent had waited for this moment since the dawn of creation. With a movement that sent shockwaves through the seas, Jörmungandr began to loosen its grip on its own tail. As it did so, the very foundations of the earth trembled. Coastlines crumbled, mountains shook, and the stars themselves seemed to shudder in the sky. In Asgard, the gods felt the disturbance. Thor, the mighty thunder god, gripped Mjolnir tightly, knowing that his destined battle with the world serpent was at hand. Odin, the All-Father, gazed out from his throne in Valhalla, his one eye narrowing as he sensed the approach of the twilight of the gods. Back in Midgard, humans cowered in fear as the world around them began to unravel. The sun and moon were swallowed by the giant wolf's skull and Hati, plunging the realm into an unnatural twilight. The Bifrost Bridge shimmered and cracked, its rainbow hues fading as Heimdall prepared to sound the Jallarhorn. Beneath the waves, Jörmungandr continued to uncoil. With each movement, tsunamis crashed against distant shores, and entire islands were swallowed by the sea. The serpent's massive body rose from the depths, displacing enough water to flood coastal cities and drown low-lying lands. As Jörmungandr's head breached the surface, its forked tongue tasted the air, sensing the fear and chaos that permeated the world. Its eyes, ancient and cold, surveyed the destruction it had already wrought. But this was merely the beginning. With a sound that shook the heavens, Jörmungandr finally released its tail. The action sent a ripple through reality itself, as if the very structure of the universe depended on the serpent's grip. As its tail slipped free, the barriers between worlds weakened, allowing the forces of chaos to seep through. Freed from its self-imposed constraint, Jörmungandr rose higher, its titanic form now visible to the terrified inhabitants of Midgard. Those who gazed upon it felt their sanity slip, unable to comprehend the sheer scale and alien nature of the beast. In the distance, storm clouds gathered as Thor approached, ready to face his nemesis. The world serpent turned its attention to the thunder god, a primordial hunger gleaming in its eyes. Their battle would shake the foundations of creation, a conflict foretold since the beginning of time. As Jörmungandr prepared to meet its foe, its venomous breath poured forth, poisoning the sky and seas. The very air became toxic, and the oceans turned to acid. The serpent's presence alone was enough to unmake the world, fulfilling its role in the prophecy of Ragnarok. The stage was set for the final battle. Gods and monsters converged, drawn by the inexorable pull of fate. And at the center of it all, Jörmungandr, coiled and uncoiled, its massive form a promise of destruction and renewal. As the world trembled on the brink of destruction, the icy shores of Niflheim began to crack and splinter. From the mists of the primordial realm emerged a sight that chilled the blood of gods and mortals alike. Naglfar, the dreaded ship of the dead, fashioned from the untrimmed fingernails and toenails of the deceased. The massive vessel creaked and groaned as it broke free from its frozen moorings, each sound a ghostly wail that echoed across the 9 worlds. Its hull, a patchwork of sickly pale nail fragments, seemed to undulate in the dim light, as if the very ship itself was alive and breathing. At the helm stood Hrym, the frost giant, his eyes gleaming with malevolent anticipation. Behind him, rank upon rank of the dishonored dead began to materialize on the deck. These were the souls of those who had died of old age or disease, denied entry to Valhalla. Their spectral forms shimmered with an otherworldly light, their faces twisted in eternal anguish and rage. As Naglfar began to move, the waters around it turned black and viscous. The ship left in its wake a trail of decay, withering any life it passed. Fish floated to the surface, their bodies twisted and malformed. Seabirds fell from the sky, their feathers molting in mid-flight. The ship's advance sent ripples through the fabric of reality. At Midgårdur, humans looked to the skies in terror as auroras of sickly green and purple danced across the heavens, signaling the weakening of the boundaries between worlds. Crops withered in the fields, and livestock fell dead where they stood, their life force seemingly sucked away by some unseen force. In Asgard, Heimdall's hands tightened on Gjallarhorn, the great horn he would sound to signal the final battle. He watched with growing dread as Naglfar made its inexorable journey towards the plains of Vigrid, where the fate of all creation would be decided. Odin, the All-Father, gathered his Einherjar, the worthy dead chosen to fight alongside the gods. Their spectral armies assembled, a stark contrast to the dishonorable horde aboard Naglfar. The Valkyries, once tasked with choosing the slain, now prepared for battle themselves, their swan feathers replaced by gleaming armor. Back on Naglfar, Loki, the trickster god, materialized on the deck. Freed from his bonds by the chaos of Ragnarok, he grinned maniacally at the destruction unfolding around him. He moved among the ranks of the dead, whispering promises of vengeance and glory, stoking the fires of their ancient grudges against the gods. As the ship sailed on, it began to grow. With each league it traveled, more souls of the dishonored dead were drawn to it. The vessel swelled to impossible proportions, its hull straining to contain the multitudes. The nails that formed its structure lengthened and twisted, forming grotesque spires and towers that reached towards the roiling skies. The journey of Naglfar did not go unchallenged. Aegir, god of the sea, attempted to summon great maelstroms to swallow the ship. But for each whirlpool that formed, the dead aboard Naglfar would reach out with spectral hands, their touch calming the waters and smoothing their path. As Naglfar approached Midgard, its influence grew stronger. The veil between life and death thinned, allowing ghosts and wraiths to pour into the world of the living. Cities fell into panic as the dead walked the streets, and the air grew thick with the whispers of long-buried secrets and regrets. In the heavens, the great wolf Fenrir howled, sensing the approach of his allies. Jörmungandr, the world serpent, thrashed in the oceans, creating tsunamis that cleared the path for Naglfar's final approach. Finally, as the ship of the dead reached the shores of the great battlefield, an eerie silence fell across all the realms. Hrym guided Naglfar onto the beach, its hull scraping against the sand with a sound like a million screaming souls. The gangplank lowered, and the army of the dishonorable dead began to disembark. Their spectral feet touched the soil of Midgard, and where they walked, the ground blackened and died. At the head of this terrible host strode Loki, his eyes burning with the fires of vengeance and chaos. Across the field, Odin and his forces watched in grim silence. The stage was set, the players assembled. Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, had truly begun, and the fate of all creation hung in the balance. The plains of Vigrid stretched out beneath a sky torn asunder, its very fabric rent by the cosmic forces now unleashed. Here, on this fated battlefield, the gods of Asgard and the forces of chaos converged for their final, cataclysmic confrontation. Odin, the All-Father, sat astride his eight-legged steed Sleipnir, Gungnir gleaming in his hand. His one eye blazed with the wisdom of ages as he surveyed the field. Behind him stood the Einherjar, the chosen warriors of Valhalla, their spectral forms shimmering with otherworldly light. Across the field, Fenrir the great wolf snarled, his massive jaws capable of devouring the sun itself. Beside him towered the fire giant Surtur, his flaming sword casting an infernal glow across the land. Loki, free from his bonds, grinned with malevolent glee as he led the dishonored dead from Naglfar. Thor, his red beard bristling with electricity, hefted Mjolnir. The thunder god's eyes were fixed on the horizon where Jörmungandr, the world serpent, rose from the thrashing seas, its colossal form blotting out the sky. As if by some unspoken signal, both sides surged forward. The clash of steel on steel rang out, punctuated by the screams of the falling and the battle cries of gods and monsters alike. Odin spurred Sleipnir towards Fenrir, Gungnir aimed at the wolf's heart. But Fenrir was too swift, too strong. With a terrible howl, the wolf's jaws clamped down on the All-Father, sundering flesh and shattering bone. Even as Odin fell, Vidar, his son, leapt forward. With a boot reinforced by all the cast-off leather scraps of ages, Vidar pried open Fenrir's maw, driving his sword deep into the beast's throat. Thor and Jörmungandr met in a titanic struggle that shook the foundations of the earth. Lightning arced from Mjolnir, searing the world's serpent scales, while the creature's venomous breath corroded the very air around them. They struck at each other with world-shattering force, each blow powerful enough to level mountains. Tyr, the one-handed god of war, found himself face to face with Garm, the blood-stained hound of hell. They circled each other, neither willing to make the first move. Then, in a blur of motion, they clashed. Tyr's sword flashed, Garm's teeth gleamed, and both fell, locked in a deadly embrace. Fenrir, bereft of his magical sword, fought Surtur with nothing but an antler. The fire giant's blade ignited everything it touched, and soon the plains of Vigrid were ablaze. Fenrir fought valiantly, but without his enchanted weapon, he was overmatched. As he fell, the fires of Surtur spread unchecked, consuming everything in their path. Heimdall and Loki, ancient enemies, sought each other out amidst the chaos. Their battle was one of cunning and speed, each trying to outmaneuver the other. Heimdall's sword clashed against Loki's dagger, the ringing of their weapons lost in the din of the larger battle. In the end, they struck each other down simultaneously, their millennia-old rivalry ending in mutual destruction. The Valkyries swooped through the skies, their spears flashing as they engaged the giants and monsters that threatened to overwhelm the gods' forces. But for every foe they felled, two more seemed to take its place. As the battle raged on, the very fabric of reality began to unravel. The roots of Yggdrasil trembled, and the stars themselves began to fall from the sky. The sun and moon, long pursued by the wolf's skull and Hati, were finally devoured, plunging the world into darkness broken only by the fires of combat. In the heart of the melee, Thor and Jörmungandr continued their earth-shattering duel. With a mighty swing, Thor finally crushed the serpent's skull with Mjolnir. But the victory was short-lived. Staggering back, poisoned by the creature's venom, the thunder god managed 9 steps before collapsing, never to rise again. As gods and monsters fell, the armies of the dead clashed endlessly, neither side able to claim a decisive victory. The Einherjar fought with the skill honed by centuries in Valhalla, while the dishonored dead were driven by an insatiable hunger for vengeance. Surtur, unopposed after Freyr's fall, strode across the battlefield. His fiery sword swept in great arcs, igniting the world tree itself. As Yggdrasil burned, the 9 worlds began to collapse into one another. The fires of Ragnarok raged unchecked across the 9 worlds, their hungry flames devouring everything in their path. What had begun on the battlefield of Vigrid now spread to every corner of creation, a conflagration of cosmic proportions that signaled the end of all things. Surtur, the fire giant, strode across Midgardr, his flaming sword carving swaths of destruction through forests, mountains, and seas. The very air ignited in his wake, creating firestorms that consumed entire continents. Cities that had stood for millennia crumbled to ash in moments, their towers toppling like children's blocks. In Jotunheim, even the frost giants could not withstand the encroaching flames. Mountains of ice that had stood since the dawn of time liquefied, creating vast steam clouds that blotted out what remained of the sky. The great fortress of Utgard, pride of the giants, collapsed in on itself as its icy foundations gave way. The great serpent Jörmungandr, though slain by Thor, had unleashed its venom into the world's oceans before its death. Now that poison mixed with the boiling seas, creating noxious fumes that choked the air and killed whatever life had managed to survive the initial onslaught. In the final moments, as the last mountain peak slipped beneath the waves, a profound silence fell across the flooded world. The roar of fires, the crash of toppling mountains, the screams of the dying all were silenced, replaced by the quiet lapping of waves under a dim, star-studded sky. The 9 worlds were no more, reduced to a vast, unbroken expanse of water under a smoke-filled sky. Ragnarok had run its course. The old world had ended in fire and flood, just as the prophecies had foretold. In the aftermath of Ragnarok, an eerie stillness settled over the vast, unbroken sea that had swallowed the 9 worlds. The waters lay dark and motionless under a sky devoid of sun or moon. It seemed as if all of creation held its breath, waiting for a sign that the cycle of destruction and rebirth would continue. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, a change began to ripple through the depths. Far below the surface, where even the light of the fallen stars couldn't penetrate, the seafloor began to shift. Tectonic plates, reshaped by the cataclysm, ground against each other with renewed vigor. The friction generated heat and pressure, creating a network of underwater volcanoes that began to spew forth molten rock. As the volcanic activity intensified, new landmasses started to form. Islands rose from the depths, steam hissing as superheated rock met cold seawater. These nascent lands were barren at first, nothing more than black, volcanic rock. But as they broke the surface and cooled, they became the foundation for the world to come. As the world continued to heal and grow, echoes of the old began to manifest in the new. In a grove of ancient-looking trees, the first whispers of consciousness stirred. These were not yet gods, but the potential for divinity, born from the memories and essence of those who had fallen in the great battle. Near a crystal-clear spring, two figures stirred. They were Lif and Lifthrasir, the prophesied survivors who had weathered Ragnarok hidden in the depths of Yggdrasil. Now they emerged into the new world, blinking in wonder at the beauty around them. They would become the progenitors of a new race of humans, carrying forward the legacy of the old world while embracing the potential of the new. And so, from the ashes of Ragnarok, a new world was born. It carried within it echoes of the old in the shape of the land, in the stirring of divine consciousness, in the very essence of life itself. But it was also a world of new possibilities, unburdened by the fate that had doomed its predecessor. As Lif and Lifthrasir gazed out over this new creation, they felt a sense of hope and wonder, ready to begin the next great cycle of existence.